Welcome back to Rise and Tell with Sheekha. I am Sheekha Singh, your host and author. I have got something special to share. My brand new book, Unburnable Ambition: How Overachievers Win Without Burning Out, is coming on Jan 5th, 2026. This book is for all of us who dream big but refuse to let burnout be the price. If you'd like early chapter, preview, and launch bonuses, head to shikhasingh.com/unburnableambition and sign up today. Now let's dive into today's episode. Our guest for today has been an author of 3 books, and his 3rd book just recently came out. Our guest for today is Ryan Gottfredson. He's a PhD and is a cutting-edge leadership development author, researcher, and a consultant. He loves giving ideas and actionable tips, especially that revolve around number 3. Whenever I asked him a question, he gave 3 strategies, 3 levels, 3 tips. And the conversation revolved around developing a stronger mindset and changing from one level to the other. Ryan also talked about his new book, Becoming Better. Ryan has been Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestselling author, and his 2 previous books are Success Mindsets and The Elevated Leader. He's also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. He helps organizations and people vertically develop their leaders primarily through a focus on mindsets. In a world that obsessed about hustle and doing more and upgrading knowledge, skills, and talent, Ryan gave us a different perspective and spoke about being. He spoke about how can we elevate, how can we become better leaders by focusing on the being aspect of the graph and not the doing. So let's not waste any time and let's get started. So there you go, everybody. Today we have with us Ryan Gottfredson. Welcome to our show, Ryan. It's a pleasure to have you on our show.
Hey, thanks for creating such an awesome show to be on. This is great.
Thank you so much. First of all, I have to congratulate on your book. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, new book is out. The book is titled Becoming Better, The Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation. And yeah, I'm sure we'll get into it as we go along.
It is my favorite topic. So let's just dive right in. Ryan, what's the most favorite part in that book? Your most favorite part?
Yeah, favorite part about the book, man, that's like asking your favorite thing about your child or something like that. Like there's so much to love about it. But here's what I love about what I feel like the impact of the book can be. And that the impact of the book is to help people awaken to themselves and awaken to a novel or new developmental strategy that could be transformational. And so I love the content in the book, and surely I'm biased, but I love the impact that it's having on readers so far. And that's been the coolest thing really to be a part of. And that's why I think as an author, we write books, is to have an impact. So it's been fun to, now that it's out in the world for, a couple months now, that it's having that impact.
Awesome. Okay, so my first topic, Ryan, and my first question is going to be around high achievers. And I know you've done a lot of research and you have the qualification to back that up and a lot of science. So tell us, why are high achievers sometimes caught up in that process of just doing things? But I know you have a different way of putting it across. So I'll let you explain that. Tell us, what are the common things that high achievers end up doing that hurt them and their career?
Yeah, so it's helpful for us to understand kind of where high achievers are at. I think it's helpful to understand a framework that is core to my book. And in this framework, I want you to kind of picture on the x-axis, I want you to picture what's called our doing side. And then I want you to think about the y-axis as being our being side.
Okay.
And I think it's helpful to recognize that we have these two different sides of ourselves. So we could think about some really famous people. Let me throw out some names. You could think about people like Michael Jackson, Bill Clinton, Ellen DeGeneres, Tiger Woods are some that quickly come to mind. These are individuals that we all recognize, right? They're famous. There's a reason why I'm bringing them up. It's because they have excelled in the field in which they have operated, right? We've got the king of pop as a part of that list, right? So these are individuals that are really high on their doing side.
Right.
But part of the reason why I selected these individuals is because while we all know who they are and they're all rather talented people, we also would understand that there's some controversy surrounding these individuals. And the controversy that surrounds these individuals is not connected to their talent, knowledge, or skills. It's not connected to their doing side. It's connected to their being side.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've learned as we kind of understand this is, yes, we have these two different sides of ourselves, but our being side ultimately puts a ceiling on the level of effectiveness and success.
Okay.
And here's the other thing to kind of consider with this is when you think about all of our development efforts, our education systems, our athletic programs, our organizational development efforts, they almost all focus on our doing side. And one of the takeaways from this is kind of this idea of, okay, if I want to get better, if I want to do more, I've got to push, I've got to go, I've got to go.
Right.
And that's an emphasis on our doing side. And so I think a lot of us get stuck there, not because it's bad, but what I've found is that it's only incrementally helpful. And if we truly want to become better, particularly in a transformational way, it's really not about our doing side. It's about the being side. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It is pretty interesting when you put it that way. I never thought of it because our culture is famous for the hustle culture. And there's so many people who keep forcing us to do more, to be more. So here you're talking about the being axis. And it's interesting for me because now I want to know, how can young leaders, people who are wanting to get promoted into leadership positions, because in my experience, Ryan, I've seen that unless you prove something to the organization or to your team, you wouldn't be considered for that position. So
Yes.
tell me, how does being come into action in regards with leadership positions?
Yeah, you're spot on. So why do people get promoted into leadership roles, right? And you kind of are getting into this. Largely, people in organizations get promoted because of their doing side talent and abilities, right? We generally promote the people who can do the most and do the best. But just because you are successful as an individual contributor and you can get stuff done doesn't mean you're going to be an effective leader. So there's nothing wrong with the doing side, but it's really our being side that sets the ceiling for the effectiveness of our leadership. And so if we want to become a more effective leader, if we want to have a greater positive impact, as a leader, it's really all about our altitude along our being side. And it's less about our talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Oh, wow. That's interesting because I thought, we need to have like a perfect balance of talent, knowledge, skills, plus empathy. The other day, I had another podcast interview, and he said that, there's 6 pillars of leadership. And one of them was humor, and one of them was empathy. Empathy and humor were the top ones that stood out to me. But now you're saying that, okay, keep the skills aside, keep the knowledge aside, now focus on you and your being and how you actually handle that position and the responsibilities that come with it. Ryan, so tell me, I know you've written a lot about the mindset and again self-improvement tips. Where does mindset come into picture, and how can someone leverage or change the way they think or change their mindset in order to become equal both on their doing and on the being side of the scale?
Yeah, great question. So our mindsets are really not connected to our doing side. They are one of the focal things that we focus on to elevate along our being side. And so let me define our being side. So we've defined our doing side, which is our talent, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Our being side is the quality and sophistication of our body's internal operating systems. So on our being side, one of the things that's critical to understand is that our bodies can be wired on a lower being side level for self-protection, or on a higher being side level can be wired for value creation. So let me give you a quick example of this. So how would you say that most people respond to constructive criticism? They get what?
Mad or sad. And
Or
they're very,
defensive, right? Would be another one,
defensive. Correct.
right? So this is getting at our internal wiring. If I receive constructive criticism, then how is my body prone to respond? Well, it's most common that people get defensive because that's a self-protective strategy.
Right.
But while that helps them feel good in the short term, it holds them back from learning, growing, and developing and becoming a better value creator in the long term.
Correct.
And so when we understand our mindsets are ultimately what guides our responses, our automatic responses to these situations.
Ooh.
And so one of the things that we've learned on the research on mindsets is our mindsets at a foundational level are neural connections that undergird how we think, how we learn, and how we behave. And for the most part, they operate below the level of our consciousness. That when we encounter a situation such as receiving constructive criticism, or maybe I'm presented with a learning zone challenge, how is my body likely to respond? What we've learned is that people with a fixed mindset, they tend to avoid learning zone challenges because they see learning zone challenges as an area where they might fail or look bad, and they don't want to fail and look bad. Right? That's a self-protective strategy. But people with a growth mindset, they see learning zone challenges not as something that's dangerous, but as an opportunity to learn and grow. And so what I find when I work with organizational leaders, 60% of leaders have more of a fixed mindset than a growth mindset.
Wow.
So leaders are predominantly wired to hold on to what's worked in the past, and they're reluctant to embrace what might work better in the future. And what's interesting about this is right, I'm guessing you're with me. If we were to put a room full of 100 leaders together and ask any of them, do you have a fixed mindset? I don't think anyone would raise their hand. Everybody thinks that they have a growth mindset. But that's generally not the case when it comes to leaders. And so when we focus on mindsets, we open the door to help us to awaken to the quality of our internal operating system, or in other words, our altitude along our being side.
Wow. That's interesting. And that's spot on, actually, because I have noticed that some of the leaders, no matter how much experienced they are and what they bring to the table, when there are certain difficult conversations, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, oh, but we've done it this way for so long. And it's proven and it works. So why change it? Why fix something that's not broken? And I've heard that multiple times. And I love it. I love how you focus on the growth mindset, Ryan, because our podcast is based on that sole topic. And I love everything. And I love people, especially who not only read about or listen to growth mindset podcasts, but also implement the tips and strategies and suggestions that they're listening and watching. So I'm going to ask you, Ryan, what would be the top two suggestions that you would give based on your research, your qualifications, to someone who's trying to change, someone who's realized that they have a fixed mindset, but now they want to change to a growth mindset? So what would be your top two tips?
Yeah, well, let me make this available. So, in my research, and which stems from the kind of the academic realm, what I found is that there's four different sets of mindsets that have been studied over the last 40 years across management, psychology, education, and marketing. And
Okay.
what I've done, and so fixed and growth are one of those sets. There's three other sets. I'll just quickly name them off. There's closed and open, prevention and promotion, and inward and outward. And
Okay.
so most people have never heard of these mindsets before.
Never.
And so the first step is always kind of giving people a language for this, because once we could put labels and descriptions to these things, then we could start to focus on them. So
Correct.
for me, that's generally the place to start. Next, if we can evaluate the quality of our mindsets, that's going to be very illuminating. So
Correct.
one of the things that I've developed, and it's free on my website at ryangottfredson.com, but I've got a free personal mindset assessment. So
Okay.
if you go there, you take this assessment, you'll get a report that identifies the quality of your mindsets across these four different continuums relative to over 50,000 other people who have taken this assessment. And
Wow.
so what I found, one of the things you'll find interesting is we've got these four different sets of mindsets. I've had 50,000 people who have taken this assessment. Only 2.5% are in the top quartile for all four sets of mindsets. So what that says is that, and I'll include myself in this, is most of us, even me, has some work to do on our mindsets. That
Correct.
all of us, almost all of us, have some self-protective wiring, which just indicates we've got a lower being side altitude. And so
Mm.
if we can awaken to our current altitude and current quality of our mindsets, get a sense of what a more elevated mindset would be,
Right.
then we could start to do the work of elevating along our being side.
Wow. That's interesting. That just totally changes the entire perspective when you plug in the data and the numbers in it. That's fun because all of us like to say, oh yeah, I'm learning, I'm developed, I'm not what I was last year, and I've changed my approach to certain things. But I think that's where these assessments come into handy. It's an amazing checkpoint for each one of us at some stage or the other where you're like, okay, time to go figure out if you've actually changed or not, and time to figure out how much growth that you have to do. And I like to think of us and our journey as something that's always in progress,
Mhm.
especially if you're learning, because every day I feel there's no age for learning. Plus, if you're not learning, you're not growing. But I'm intrigued now. I want to go take that assessment.
Yes,
I
go
will.
take it. And
Yeah,
if it's okay, let me share a part of my own personal journey to maybe kind of
sure.
bring this to life. So I've heard a saying that I love, and the saying goes, how we are wired to survive our childhood is not the same wiring that we need to thrive as adults, as employees, as leaders, as parents, as spouses, etc. And one of the ways that this has played out for me is you need to know a little bit about my family context. So
Okay.
my dad, during the first half of his career, he was an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And in the early 1980s, about the time when I was born, his business went under during the economic downturn of the early 80s. And that was, I think, rather demoralizing for my dad.
Right.
And
Right.
so what my dad did is he was an engineer. He took a stable civic job. And I grew up having my dad essentially preach to me, you should never be an entrepreneur because it will put your family at risk,
Right.
and don't ever take on debt. Debt will hold you back. So this was a part of my mindset. And what I've come to learn is it actually is a part of a what's called a prevention mindset. When we become more focused on avoiding problems than we
Right.
are on reaching goals. And so this was my mindset coming into adulthood, is I had a prevention mindset. And in fact, if I'm being honest with you, I think I became a professor because of my prevention mindset. Because I
Mm.
had different opportunities, and I think I chose professor because it was the safest route. I mean,
Right.
there's tenure associated with being a
Right.
professor.
Right.
And so I didn't have to be an entrepreneur, and I didn't have to take on any debt.
Right.
So this was my mindset at play. But fast forward, as I'm a professor, I'm starting to realize I'm not sure I'm going to be thrilled about my career journey, essentially teaching the same classes for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so I actually, I at that time, I took a leave of absence from my university. I became a consultant at Gallup. And when I got done with that, I came back to the university and I started to do research on mindsets.
Wow.
And what I learned is that I had this prevention mindset. And you see, I thought my prevention mindset was good because I could justify it. Because if I didn't become an entrepreneur and if I didn't take on debt, there's some that keeps me safe.
Correct.
But what I learned is that what was holding me back from reaching any goals or aspirations that I had. And so I started to work on developing more of a promotion mindset. And once I shifted my mindset, I started to think differently. I started to think less about how do I survive today and how do I make the most of today. And so in this shift in mindset, I then started to dream in a way that I had never dreamed before. What if I could create my best and brightest future? What would that entail? And once I got clear on that, and with this new mindset, I decided I want to write a book. And so I started on the process of writing my first book. And then I discovered, as authors, you generally don't make much money from your books.
Exactly.
And so what I needed to do is, if I wanted to make this worthwhile, I needed to start a business.
Yeah.
So I needed to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And then to start my business, I needed to go into debt. So I now was in this place where I was willing to do the very things that my dad had taught me not to do. And yeah, it was scary, but at the same time, it was exciting and liberating because I was heading in the direction of my dreams. Only possible for me to head in this direction by first shifting my mindsets from a prevention mindset to a promotion mindset. And so that's the power of shifting our mindsets. And I just remember going back, if I go back to, even 10 years ago, when I had this prevention mindset, I remember, oh yeah, how I think about life and the world is the best way. Right. But it wasn't. It was a very limiting way. It kept me safe in the moment, but it prevented me from creating value. And so hopefully, as I'm telling this story, and we can unpack it if you want, but as I'm telling this story, as I make this shift from a prevention mindset to a promotion mindset, what I'm doing is I'm elevating along my being side. Right. And as I elevated along my being side, it allowed me to become what I believe for anybody who elevates along their being side, which is a brighter light in the world around them.
Love it. Love it. I was actually kind of imagining and visualizing the graph when you were talking about how you elevated and you went from this particular mindset to the other. I think that's brilliant, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it. And I feel like most of us have that exact same doubts. We want to choose options that are safe. We want to go through the paths where people have already walked on and taken, and it's proven, but it's certain kind of fear that holds us back. Like you said, it was childhood upbringing for you. For some it's culture, for some it's different things, various factors. So I want to ask you, Ryan, what can we do as adults to overcome that fear and even start thinking, what if I start doing what I love instead of thinking about bills for now?
Yeah. Let me give you a framework that I think might help us unpack this a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure.
So this framework comes from the field of developmental psychology. So if anybody's listening and you've taken a human development class, you will learn that the primary focus of developmental psychology is about childhood development stages. Right. As children go from infants to adults, they go through a number of different stages, and they essentially do that automatically. Now, there's a small segment of this developmental psychology space that doesn't focus on childhood development. And in fact, it focuses on adult development. And
Okay.
it's not a very large body of research, but what they found is fascinating. So developmental psychologists used to assume that adults stop developing when they reach adulthood.
Right.
But what they've come to learn is that's not true. That in adulthood, adults can develop. And in fact, there's 3 different developmental stages.
Oh.
But what's really fascinating about this is what they find is that while adults can develop in adulthood, most actually don't.
Okay.
And so let me unpack, if it's okay, these 3 adult development stages, because I think it helps us to see why it might be difficult to go from one stage to the next. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Excited.
So what we need to understand about these 3 stages is that at these different stages, our bodies are wired to fulfill different needs.
Right.
And so this is really connected to our internal operating system. And in fact, this is a different framework that we could use to evaluate our being side altitude.
Okay.
So at the base level, let's just call it level 1. At this level, our bodies are wired to fulfill the needs of safety, comfort, and belonging.
Okay.
So we want to join groups that will help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like we belong. That could be a family group, a social group, a friend group, a religious group, an association, or even our employer, right? We could join a job. And when we're in this level, we don't say, I want to take charge. What we say is, I don't want to take charge. You just tell me what to do and I will do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong.
Right.
And what research has found is that 64% of adults operate here. So most don't get beyond this level.
Okay.
But does that level make sense before I go to the next level?
It does. Yep. It
Okay.
does. Yeah.
So the second level here, you're going to see a significant shift in our needs. At this level, we're no longer focused on being safe, comfortable, or feeling like we belong. We're focused on standing out, advancing, and getting ahead.
Okay.
And so now we're willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. So this was me when I wrote my first book. I was now moving away from safety, comfort, and belonging to writing a book where my goal was to hit the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller lists, right? Why? So I could stand out, advance, and get ahead.
Correct.
So this is actually, 35% of adults get to this level. And this is where 85% of leaders operate, is this level.
Okay.
So that's the second level. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. The third level, again, we're going to see a radical shift in our needs. So at level 1, we want to stand in. At level 2, we want to stand out. At level 3, we don't care about standing in and we don't care about standing out. We care about contributing, adding value, and lifting others.
Wow.
And so now we take on this bigger picture. We generally have a purpose that's focused on contributing to something bigger than ourselves.
Wow.
And so these are the 3 levels. Only 1% of adults get to this top level and 8% of leaders get to that level. Wow. But hopefully, let me draw a couple of connections. I'll let you ask some questions. So one connection is, from this, we can now see this continuum from being wired for self-protection at the bottom to being wired for value creation at the top. And to get back to your question is, in order to go from one level to the other, it requires that we change and alter our needs and our values. And that is inherently scary.
It is. Yeah.
Right? So there's a reason why 64% of adults never develop in adulthood, is because they're afraid at some level, whether consciously or subconsciously, they're afraid to change their values.
Yeah.
But when we understand this framework, to me, it gives greater hope that I can develop, right? I don't think I'm where I want to be. I'm on that journey, and I don't know if I'll ever be done. But now that I know that framework, I can get a sense of where I'm at and where I want to go, and then what it's going to take to get there.
Wow. That is outright inspiring, Ryan. I have to give you that. I think you've given me a next goal now. I love it. I love how you made it so easy to understand and it was so clear of how we choose to either stay at one level or move forward and advance to the next level. I love it. And I actually want to know, what are your goals to get to that the third
The
level?
third level. Yeah. Well, so I don't think so. Here's what I know is we don't spend 100% of our time in any of these levels. We can kind of
Yeah.
shift and adjust
Yeah.
depending upon our circumstances. But I do believe we have a center of gravity, meaning that's kind of our home base where we gravitate to, particularly under pressure and stress. And so I think when we understand this notion of center of gravity, it gets me to think, how do I spend a greater percentage of my time at that third level?
Mm.
Now, so I think that I'm going to call them three different strategies to get there. So I'm going to talk about surface level strategies, deeper level strategies, and deepest level strategies. And I've had experience with all of these. So let me start with the surface level. When we are working on upgrading our internal operating system, inherently what we're trying to do is better regulate and upgrade our body's nervous system. So some surface level or starter level strategies are to do things like meditation, yoga, journaling, even cold plunging are types of activities that if we engage in them on a regular basis, it helps us better regulate our body's nervous system.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Definitely.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's the surface level strategies. The deeper level strategies are when we start to focus on our mindsets or the innate programming of our internal operating system. And so that's where we could get in, as we talked about earlier, some of these if-then statements. If I receive constructive criticism, then how is my body wired to respond? Or if I get cut off on the freeway, then how is my body wired to respond? And so at that deeper level, we can investigate specific programming embedded in our internal operating system and make adjustments where needed. So that's the deeper level. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Perfect.
So
I
that was
come from
me.
a computer background, so that kind of makes sense to me because of the if then statements and the operating system. So yes.
Yeah, good. So this was me as I shifted from prevention to promotion. I learned that I had some programming patterns that were related to entrepreneurship and debt, and I changed those patterns. And then as my journey went on, I stepped into the deepest level strategies.
Ooh.
So one of the things that I've learned is that there's a couple of things that hold us back in our being side altitude or even draw us downward.
Okay.
And those things are trauma and neurodivergency. So one of the things that we've learned is that the more trauma somebody experiences, the more wired their body becomes for self-protection. And what I've also learned is different neurodivergencies like ADHD, which is among the most common, are literally wiring challenges that causes one to be more self-protective as opposed to value creating. And so these deepest level strategies are meant to address these issues, and they generally require somebody who has, professional qualifications. So these are things like trauma therapy, neurofeedback therapy, and even there's mounting research around psychedelic assisted therapy. And so to kind of just continue my own journey is, I did some mindset growth. I shifted from prevention to promotion. And I think I felt like that was transformational. Well, fast forward a little bit. And one of the things that I came to learn, and I learned this from reading the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Okay. But I learned reading that, and I didn't really realize it until then, that I have some trauma in my past. So one of the things that I learned is that while my parents were always there for me physically, they were rarely there for me emotionally. So I have some childhood neglect in my past. And what I've come to learn is that childhood neglect is as impactful on one's body as physical abuse.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the things that as I came to learn that I did have this neglect in my past and it had impacted my body's internal operating system, I started to work with a trauma therapist. And I engaged in a couple of different therapy modalities. So one is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and the other is called internal family systems therapy. And these are both therapeutic modalities that are designed to help one heal their body's nervous system, and particularly in this case from trauma. And I would say, while I felt like I had grown a lot just by doing the mindset work, doing that trauma work just rapidly accelerated my growth along my being side. And so for some of us that have some trauma in our past or maybe some neurodivergencies, we might need to get down to this deepest level to truly upgrade along our being side. So I went over those pretty quickly, those 3 levels: surface level, deeper level, deepest level.
I love it. I love that, Ryan, because I feel like so many of us are hesitant to unpack that hidden secrets and the hidden trauma inside us that we would rather rot ourselves in front of television or just doom scrolling than going there. And you said the right thing. You said when you were on that transformative journey, this was completely different and this was at another level. So I feel like you have to get that high from going up another stage to then be ready to face whatever's at the next level and to really upgrade. I like your choice of words when you told you would have to do this to really upgrade to the next level, and that was definitely what that is, because unless you have the strength and the courage to face everything that's hidden inside your body or even in your mind, it's very difficult to advance to that next level, and it takes a lot of courage. But I love that. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Because you're right, it is scary to do some of this deeper work, and I felt that fear stepping into this. But here's what I've learned, having kind of gone through it, is I'm never going to say it's easy, and I'm never going to say it's not scary. But what I've learned is that it is easier and not as scary as I anticipated. And I hope, and everybody that I've talked to that's been on a similar journey, I feel like has said the same thing. So just know, if it feels scary to you, it's probably not as scary as you think it will be.
Awesome. Okay, I will definitely keep that in mind. I'm going to be selfish when I ask you this question, but I want to be you. And I want to be that person who's done the inner work, who is upgrading every chance that they get, building the dream life that you once dreamt of, doing things that make you happy. But at the end of the day, reality hits. There are bills to pay, there's responsibilities, and there's a lot of work until you really decide to take that plunge. So, since you've been there, done that, and walked through that path already, what would be your biggest tip or advice for people who really want to do what they love doing but just don't have the courage to leave things and do that yet, but you already did it?
Well, so here's what I've learned, and I'm going to paint just a rather stark example just to kind of make this point. So let's say we're dealing with somebody who, for any variety of reasons, is currently homeless, right? They're living on the streets and their life is not ideally what it could be, right?
Yeah.
And so we could ask ourselves the question, how does a person get out of living on the streets and start to live, I'm going to call, a more stable life? And I'm going to give you kind of 2 options. Is the option to improve along our doing side by gaining new knowledge and more skills, or is the better option to improve along our being side and change our mindsets?
Yeah.
And I think so often when we say, how do I get there? We are oftentimes thinking too much about what knowledge do I need to gain? What skills do I need to develop? And we tend to think on that doing side. But what I've come to learn, that if we want to help somebody get out of homelessness,
Right.
We've got to start with the mindsets, because once the mindset shifts, then we start to think and operate differently. And so I think it is helpful to start with the focus on our mindsets. And so I hope that my books, and particularly my new book, Becoming Better, will be a great resource to help people engage in that journey. I've got the personal assessment that I mentioned on my website. And then one of the things that I do is I do individual coaching to help people do these mindset upgrades. Because here's what I've learned. It is not easy to awaken to and have the courage to do mindset work on our own. But if we can have a partner, it makes it so much more doable. And whether that partner is a coach, somebody like myself, or even a therapist, for example, I generally think if we want to do this work, we will dramatically accelerate the process by having a partner guide us in that journey. And so that doesn't need to be where you start, but if we want to be serious about it, what I've just come to learn is you really need a partner in that journey.
I agree. I 100% agree. I think I've interviewed at least 25 people till now, all amazing leaders, speakers. They've done great in their respective areas. And that's one common theme that everybody has. Get a mentor or get a coach, hire a coach, or find someone who you can share things, ask them for ideas, suggestions, and get the feedback and actually use that feedback to become better. So I completely agree. So thank you so much, Ryan.
Another way of phrasing that is, don't be focused on the fruits, be focused on the roots, right? Focus on the drivers of the outcomes that we want to create, not on the outcomes themselves. Because what I've learned, I'm not a great gardener myself, but what I do know about gardening is I can't force a tree to grow or it to bear fruit, but I could create the right conditions for that to occur. And I think ultimately that's what we've got to do for ourselves. We've got to create the right conditions for us to thrive. And if we're worried about the fruit, that's the money, that's the short-term needs. And I'm not saying those aren't important, but if we focus on that, I don't think we'll reach our potential.
Correct. Agreed. 100%. Thank you, Ryan. I want to know, which book did you enjoy writing the most out of all three, and why?
Each book is such a journey, and you learn so much through the process. I would say I'm the most proud of my new book. And I think it's because I articulate the concepts in the book more effectively than I had in previous books. Right. And so I'm really proud of that. But I will say there's something about writing, and maybe you can relate to this. There's something about writing your first book that it's like it's a new journey, and it's an uncharted journey, and so it feels exciting and thrilling because you've never walked down that path before. And so I would say just walking down that path was a ton of fun. Not to say that the other books weren't fun, but it's kind of like, oh, I've done this before. Whereas, it's moving out into uncharted territory. So I love that about the first book.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. Well, before we end the show, Ryan, I want to ask you, what would be your top three? I feel like you love the number three because you've been giving 3 strategies, 3 levels, 3 everything. So what would be your top 3 tips or top 3 suggestions to someone who wants to stop being big blocker to themselves, like limiting beliefs? What would be their top 3 tips?
Yeah, we've all got them, right? We've all got limiting beliefs. We all have some self-protective fears. We need to get clear on what those are if we want to rise above them. And so that's where I'll maybe point back. I've just found that the best way to awaken to what our blockers are is by investigating our mindsets, because any blocker that we have are going to be connected to some self-protective mindsets. So I hope that if you're listening to this, Maybe the first step is to go to my website, ryangottfredson.com, take my mindset assessment. You'll get your own individual results, and then you'll get resources to kind of guide you in elevating your mindsets. And in fact, I'll throw this out there is that if you're listening to this and you take that assessment, get your results, if you hit me up on social media or on my website, I'd be happy to jump on a call to talk through your results with you.
Awesome. That's perfect. That is so wonderful. Thank you so much, Ryan. We really appreciate that. Thank you for your time. And I think all the tips and the suggestions were actionable. And all of us would have definitely learned a thing or two about mindsets and elevating the mindset. So thanks a lot for being our guest today, Ryan.
No, and thanks for hosting this and creating this podcast. I think maybe I should have mentioned it earlier, but I don't think anybody would create a podcast from that first level of adult development, right? Because it's kind of a thankless job. It is a lot of work to create a podcast, right? And we know podcasters that create podcasts to stand out, advance, and get ahead. Correct. We also know that there's podcasters that are out there to contribute, add value, and lift others. And I sense that, the nature of your podcast and the topics that you focus on suggest more of this contribute, add value, and lift others. So thank you for creating this space and also an example for the rest of us.
I'm honored. Thank you so much, Ryan. Means a lot coming from you. Thanks a lot. I hope you've learned a thing or two. Please check out Ryan's resources on his website. I will also link them in the description box below. Thank you for tuning in for today's episode of Rise and Tell with Sheekha. My upcoming book, Unburnable Ambition, is all about how to chase your biggest goals without losing yourself to burnout. You can now sign up at sheekasingh.com/unburnableambition for early access and launch updates. Until next time, keep growing, keep glowing, and be yourself, and keep your ambition unburnable. Thank you.